Thanks for listening to the Northwest Yearly Meeting podcast. We hope that you find the conversations to be helpful and enlightening as you get to hear from those in the Evangelical Friends movement. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss when a new episode comes out. Now, enjoy the episode.
Hello, dear listeners,
and welcome to our October episode of the Northwest Yearly Meeting podcast. Today, we embark on a fascinating journey into the intersection of faith and technology,
exploring the profound topic of AI.
In a world where technology evolves at an astonishing pace, it's only natural that we, as a faith community, contemplate the implications of AI on our lives, values, and beliefs. As we delve into this thought-provoking conversation, let us remember that faith is a cornerstone
of our Quaker tradition, guiding us through the ever-changing landscape of our modern world.
As we embark on this dialogue, we encourage you, our cherished listeners, to reflect on your own beliefs and experiences in this digital age. Your insights and perspectives are invaluable as we navigate these uncharted waters together.
Thank you for being a part of our Quaker community and for tuning into this important conversation. Let's dive into the world of AI and faith with curiosity, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to the principles that unite us. Enjoy the episode.
Wow.
I know, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So, in case you're just being like, dang, Jacob's, he's something's different about him this time. If you can't tell from the title of this episode and whatever, we're talking about AI. And so I thought it'd be fun to, I think the prompt I just put in, I went to ChatGPT. For anyone who doesn't know, that's like I don't even fully know how to explain it. If you don't know what it is, like
it's considered, I'll hop in there, generative AI, which basically means, so it's a large language model, which means like there's a lot of like words just like added to this database, like trillions of words, and there's an algorithm that kind of analyzes all the words, and it makes a prediction of what would be the most appropriate word next. So you give it a prompt, and it should generate something that would be the most, out of the data set, the most predictable thing that would be said.
Yeah, so the prompt I gave it, I just said, can you please give me a opening welcome message for the Northwest Yearly Meeting podcast, which is hosted by Austin and Jacob. That's all I put. Or maybe I said we would talk about AI as well. But the one thing that I thought was interesting, twice it references Quakers, which I'm like, I didn't put that in the prompt anywhere. So it must have pulled when I mentioned Northwest Yearly Meeting podcast. It found that on the web and somehow knew that it was a Quaker podcast or a Friends podcast. So, because I didn't mention that at all, and it references Quakers twice. And then, yeah, we talked a little beforehand. It's like, it does a lot of fluff in there, like, and I love how it says like, welcome dear listeners and cherished listeners and all this kind of stuff. Like,
it laid it on a little thick.
It did.
I mean, we do cherish our listeners.
We do.
We love every single one of you. But it was just kind of like, I was like, whoa, that's
Austin had his hands in it, or his head in his hands, because we don't post the video here, but he immediately was like holding back laughter.
it was hard for me not to laugh, not just because, and it felt kind of repetitive too.
It did. Like, so I'm saying, it's very long. It's like 4 paragraphs long. I'm like, I would never do that long of an intro. And then, yeah, it is. I don't know, maybe because the prompt was so more open-ended, it's just like running with it. But yeah, it's just like, welcome valued listeners, thanks for being here, part of this Quaker community as we explore AI and faith. It just kept going on and on and on. But that is what we want to do on this episode. We were talking about what we want to do for this month's episode and that kind of stuff, and we brought up a few topics, and one that Austin brought up was this topic of AI, which, if you're like even just the littlest bit aware of just like cultural stuff that's going on, like, this is a big thing that's happening right now in lots of different sectors, like in the entertainment world, like actors and writers are on strike right now because this is one thing that they're like fighting against. Like, they're trying to fight for fair pay, and people are being like, well, we don't need to pay writers, we can just have ChatGPT write episode for the next, Marvel movie or Star Wars show. So they're trying to, be like, we don't want any chat GPT to enter into the entertainment industry. Like that is not something that we will put up with. And so that's just one aspect of it. But there's lots of stuff. And an article that we found on Christianity Today kind of talks about some of the aspects of faith with AI. But yeah, it's out there, it's everywhere.
Yeah. So I mean, I was kind of the one that kind of came up with this idea. And one of the things I was thinking about just in terms of our podcast is we've been doing this for about a year, and we're kind of doing a bit of a shift kind of today in our format. So rather than us like interviewing somebody, because we don't know any like AI experts personally, that we would just have like a conversation about it from two people who come from a friend's background and who have maybe like a friend's like just by being a friend
In the
have an
friend's
opinion about
world.
something. But it's one of these things that is I think it's a big cultural topic, and I think that one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up here on the podcast rather than some other venues. I'm a pastor, and sometimes like just a typical Sunday morning is just not the place to talk about these things. And so I thought that this could be a good opportunity I mean, I'm sure people are thinking about it. I mean, I'm certainly thinking about it. And so we're just going to have kind of a conversation, me and Jacob, around the topic of AI, and kind of bring you along with us, and hopefully kind of stir some thoughts so that you can have conversation with other people.
Yeah.
And specifically looking at like how as friends should we think about AI, think about technology, and have like some of these conversations that we may not be having in our like local church communities.
I think like for me, just to get it started on the onset, like when you hear negative stuff about AI or whatever, at least the two things that I hear a lot about it, a lot of my siblings are teachers. And so this has been a big thing in the education world recently, is like, how do you combat it's almost like a new level of cheating, it's like
Mm-hmm.
before you had to deal with kids cheating and copying and this kind of stuff, but now you could assign a student to write a paper. I mean, you just saw the thing that it spit out for me to do this intro for the podcast when I gave it like 2 sentences of whatever. So you can say, write me a 3-page paper on George Washington and blah, 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 blah. And it can crank out a paper for you with varying level of difficulty or degrees. There's lots of different programs out there that can do it. I think ChatGPT is like the one that everyone talks about and hears about. Now, if you were a smart student, you probably would want to proofread that before you just turned it in, but and maybe make some edits to it because it's probably not up to snuff. But so that's one big thing, is like schools are really having to crack down and figure out how can you get around this. Like it's not so much like you can't really just assign work and send it home now, because someone could just have their AI do it for them and turn it in. And there's really no discernible, like it's not plagiarizing. Whereas like there are websites and stuff where you can copy a student's paper and enter it in there, and it can check for like word for word plagiarism from other sources. But because it's just making it up out of thin air, it's not plagiarizing it. And so it's not going to get flagged on anything like that. And so they're cheating, they're not doing the work, but you can't really check on it. And so that's an interesting thing. And then we were joking offhand, I don't know how many students or people are listening to this, but like Austin was telling me, like, I'm really busy this week and got a sermon that I got to write this weekend. And I joked with him because we were having this podcast episode. I was like, just have ChatGPT write your sermon for you. And like, I have heard of people doing, maybe not outright having their sermon written for them, but like having an outline written for them and then they fill in the blanks, or having like ChatGPT like summarize a chapter of the Bible and then they work from that. So like we are entering this nebulous area where you don't really have to do work, but you're not plagiarizing. So it is this weird area.
Well, and this kind of just gets to my concern as a pastor, is how will AI affect our souls? I mean, like that sounds kind of like a weird question to ask, but I definitely think that there is a legitimate concern of wondering how will these new technologies affect our faith communities and spiritual formation and in our just spiritual experience. How will this technology kind of change our faith communities and not and rather than just kind of like waiting like 50 years and then being like critiquing it, like having a full on like conversation about this, especially since we have this tool that kind of came out of nowhere seemingly. I mean, so because here's the thing, like AI has been around for a long time. It's not like a new thing, but ChatGPT kind of like
took it to the next level
and made it like everybody like pay attention to it. When you get headlines saying, that ChatGPT 4 can like pass the bar exam at like better than like 90% of people. Like that's crazy, right?
Well, and the fact that it's just creating stuff, because in a way it's like a beefed up search engine, like because it's sourcing stuff from the web to create what it's writing, but you can't just type into Google, write me a paper about George Washington. You can search for other papers that have been published about George Washington, but then you would have to take that information and write it yourself. But now you can just say, write me a paper about George Washington, and it will do it for you.
Yeah. I mean, but the crazy thing though is these generative AIs are not developed for truthfulness, right? Like you can like Google a search engine and you're going to find like other sorts of articles. Granted, they might not necessarily be truthful either, but it's not like making something up. You're finding something, right? Where like, and a lot of it's like, optimized for things like Wikipedia and where they cite their sources and all those sorts of things, where like generative AI can just like make up anything. But the thing that's so crazy about it is that it's tooled to be the most human and convincing rather than being like seeming like it's supposed to sound the best, not necessarily be the most truthful. So this like, it's, if you've ever like played around with ChatGPT, it is alarmingly confident. Like when you write stuff, you're like, wow, that's like, geez Louise. And like that's like a concern that I have is people, like you talked about like comparing it to like a search engine, right? And then like I did this, I like asked for a ChatGPT to tell me like, what do Christians believe about salvation? And it like generated like a whole bunch of stuff. Like granted, as a pastor, I can look at like, as a person who's like gone to Bible college, who thinks about these things, reads theology, reads the Bible, I could read what it said and be able to determine if it was like, truthful or not, or like biblically accurate or not. But what's so interesting is that like it's not designed to be truthful. Like that's not its highest priority. Its highest priority is to sound good. And I think that just this will shape our world in ways that I don't think we are beginning to understand. And so maybe just kind of the first question I had just generally, and we talked about this earlier, Jacob, you tend to be more optimistic, correct? When it comes to.
Yeah. Austin asked me like on the topic of AI, like where I land, optimism, pessimism, whatever. And I said, I'm probably in between like indifferent and optimistic.
And I am staunchly pessimistic about these things. Not quite to the level of, like robot overlords taking over the world. AI is going to, be an existential threat to humanity in like 20 years, and we're all going to be subservient to, the Terminator. But I do think that it does, like, I'm not sold on its goodness. So like with that, like this is kind of like also maybe could be kind of not necessarily a debate, but like we're going to come from it from different angles
Sure,
here.
sure.
But one of the things that I would love to hear from you is, what do you think are some like as a pastor or as a person who's in the church, like what would be some like ways that AI may affect our spiritual lives in like, both positively and negatively? Because I think that like there's kind of like two kind of major camps. There's like um there's like the pro side and the anti side, and I would just like to hear where you're at.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think this is where what I mean when I say I'm a little indifferent too about it is like, so I'll just say like one example that I came across on that. And I know my sister, who's a teacher, has done some similar things with this, is like having it write like descriptions for things, or in a church setting, if you worked at a church, you could use it to write like a newsletter or something that you're going to send out to people. If you're like, I don't want to have to like spend time on this, but like I said earlier, if you're smart and if you're like whatever, you should be then after it writes something for you, going over it and fact checking it and making sure there's no spelling mistakes or things like that. And so that's where I'm like, I think it can be a good tool and it can be useful, but then I'm like, I don't know how much time it would really save people in that aspect, because it's like, if you're going to have to go and reread everything and fact check it and spell check it, why don't you just write it yourself in the first place? That's coming from someone who doesn't really struggle. Like, if you told me to go write an update email about some missions updates and things that are happening, like that wouldn't stress me out, and that's not going to whatever. I know some people that they'll be like, I don't have time for that right now. And so, I could see them being like, write an update email about this missionary that did XYZ, and you put that in ChatGPT, 2 sentences, and then it sends out a little blurb, and then you can just copy and paste that and put it in your email. So on some aspects, like on a positive, I could see it maybe being a time-saving tool, although as someone who hasn't used it a ton, I'm not sure how much time it's actually going to save you if you're having to check all of its work and make constant corrections to it. And then a negative, I mean, I guess what you were saying too is like it's pulling from all over different places. And if you're asking it general questions about faith and Christianity, there is lots of information online about faith and Christianity, and there's lots of different denominations and cult groups and things like that. And so if it's just sourcing from all of those and compiling something together, it's like, okay, you get something back that's 70% accurate and 30% not, but it's all been mixed together in one thing. So there is the danger of that, of it being like it's just compiling from every willy-nilly source and putting it all together in one spot.
Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe this would be like the pragmatic approach, right? Of it being positive, right? One could think that it could streamline a whole host of tasks,
Mm-hmm.
like office tasks, or like just written communications that
Yes.
though there was this crazy I was listening to this other podcast. There was apparently this AI that you can basically you do like a video, say like we would do this podcast, and then and say that we're recording it. It could analyze it and then basically make a deep fake of us
Yeah.
speaking in a different language,
Yeah.
which would be like, you could think of like, oh wow, could be like a really good tool for like missionaries who are trying to like share the gospel in different languages. And you could be like, oh hey, send this message and change it into Cantonese, or this dialect in Moroccan Arabic or something crazy, and it would like do it, and you would sound like you, but
But it
speaking that other
wasn't you.
language, but it
Yeah.
wasn't you.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I think like that's where when I say like it could be a time-saving tool, but I don't know really, because like at the beginning of this episode, I read that little welcome to the podcast thing that I had ChatGPT make for me, um, but I just read it straight. I didn't make any edits or changes to it because I was just doing it for fun with the theme of this episode. But I don't talk that way. And so like if I really wanted that to be a time saving tool and I was like, write me something, and then I got that back to me, I'd be like, this just isn't me. Like this is weird. I would never say these things. And so I would spend more time editing the thing that it gave me than if I would have just done it myself. So that's where I'm like, I don't know. I can see it having some beneficial tools, but I'm not sure how revolutionary it's going to actually be to people's everyday life. Maybe.
So you're like just even just questioning
Yeah, I'm like, is it
is
just a
it
flash in a pan fad thing right now? Because it still is pretty new, but 5 years down the road, are people going to actually be using it that much? Like an example I think about is, do you remember the Segway?
mm-hmm.
Like I remember when Segways came out, I was probably in high school or something, and like everyone was talking about how it's going to revolutionize travel. Everyone's going to have a Segway. They're going to ride them all over the place, blah, blah, blah. And now, like, nobody has a Segway. There wasn't even a
It's
time
true.
where really everybody had Segways.
No.
Like, pretty quickly, that was just like, yeah, no, that's not actually happening. And so that's where I'm like, with a lot of technology stuff, I'm just kind of unsure. It's like I could see some potential uses for it, but I'm not sure it's going to catch on and
See,
be as revolutionary as everyone thinks it's going to be.
and this is where I kind of disagree. I feel like it's probably more apt to describe something like a chat, like a smartphone,
Mm,
in the sense that like it will completely revolutionize our lives, but but not in the way that it is, like
sure.
apocalyptically terrible, right? I think that there will be things that we find awesome and like super cool and will be very convenient for us. But on the flip side, we'll have a lot of like damaging things as well.
Mm, yeah.
And I think that it like it will augment our lives in ways that I don't think we're like prepared for. Um and so as I've been thinking about this, was reading Jacques Ellul's, he's a French philosopher,
Oh, yeah.
and he wrote a book called The Technological Society. And he talked about how technology up to a certain point in history, like when it came about, it like got integrated into the human community.
Mm,
And and then the kind of it developed rules according to human use. And but then like turn towards the industrial revolution, all that kind of got flipped like upside down, so that now like because like for the most part like new technologies took forever to advance, right? So and I'll give an example of like weaving, right? Most of human history we have sorts of weaving technologies and like yarn making technologies, things from like spindles to looms, and like if you go to different cultures, they're relatively very similar to one another, and communities can like they adapted themselves around those technologies in the way that like those technologies fit into their world according to the traditions and the cultures of those worlds. And but then when you get to the industrial revolution, people stop living according to like creaturely limits, and we now live into like an industrial world where man or humanity is now needing to fit like a mechanized world in society, and how like the logic of machines now dictate our lives in a way that like that wasn't the case beforehand. And I'll give an example of things like the car. Okay. So for most of human history, like human communities were created in such a way where like you lived in a certain area, you could walk to certain places. As a result, like you were kind of your limit of how far you could travel was within a certain range. And so like communities were built differently, houses were built differently, and there were like all these, all these things about them. Well, now with the car, like we don't live in accordance to like normal creaturely limits anymore. Like our whole like culture is now like be like car based. Like if you live in America, like you can't really function very well except if you live in a big city
mm-hmm.
that has good mass transit, if you like not having a car. Like
Yeah.
it is very difficult. Like where I live, the logic of my city rests upon the assumption of
That you have a car.
That you have a car,
Yeah.
and it's designed around vehicles. And so like that, like I think that really changes and affects like our communities in really profound ways that I don't think we like give credit, like most credit for. And I think that like AI is going to be something similar, that like I don't think it's going to like destroy us in the like, because there are people like like Silicon Valley folks who are like worried that this technology will be like, will lead to like a mass extinction event for humanity.
Yeah.
And it like, and they'll like give it like scores from like 2% chance that AI will do this to like 10% to like other crazy high levels. And I'm like, why would anybody work on that if they like seriously believe that it was going to like lead to like a 10% chance that it was going to like destroy humanity?
Right.
Like that seems bonkers to me if you like legitimately believed that.
Yeah.
Because it's like I wouldn't want to do something that could legitimately destroy humanity,
The world.
the world. But I think it's going to be kind of like smartphones, where there's an insidious effect on ourselves, like the way that like, because of smartphones, I see like people just have a harder time with relationships.
Yeah.
And they like hide behind their phones. I see this with like teenagers and like and schools, and that like smartphones are seriously affecting the social lives of people in really profound ways. And I think that that's going to be the same case with these like generative AI tools.
Yeah. Well, that was one thing that I thought was really compelling. Austin and I read an article from Christianity Today that was about AI and faith and spirituality, and I'll link that article in the description on this so people can read it. But it was really good. But that was one thing that they kind of talk about, a potential negative side effect, where I was like, oh, I could see that, and that would not be good. I think is it talks about if it were to get more entrenched into society where it was a more everyday thing, like it blurs the line on human interaction and what you expect from human interaction, because they are designed to be very personable. Like when I was, messaging this one about chat or about doing the intro to the podcast, it's like, does that work for you? Is that good? Like it's very friendly. It's not cold and calculated like you would think a robot would be. Like it's designed to mimic kind of human interaction, and in the article it said some of them will even like respond back with emojis and stuff, which is just mimicking like human, people do emojis on texting and stuff. So it really blurs the line of getting you to think like that you are actually talking to a person, not a robot. And so like if it blurs that line of what is human interaction and was not, then like, you can just then be like, well, I don't need friend. This is like an extreme scenario in my mind. Like I don't need friends because I can just talk to these things online. I know it's not, but in my mind, I'm like, it is. And so it's like, if you're substituting real human interaction for AI generative interaction, like that is just going to, you think you're being filled by that, you think it's a good substitute, but it will have long-term ramifications. And then also it just mentions like, if you're aware that you're talking to robots and stuff, but it acts like humans, and then you're always being negative to it, or you think it's below you and you're like the master and in charge because I tell this thing what to do, then like it kind of can maybe give you a superiority complex. And then when you're dealing with other humans as well, you bring that into that conversation, and you're just it lays out a lot of scenarios where it will make your interaction with other people worse off.
Yeah. I mean, so I just kind of want to address like the first thing you talked about of just like the temptation for replacement for human interaction. And I think you just said like, you think it's an extreme example.
Like to me, I'm like, I can't imagine like forsaking hanging out with my family and friends at a restaurant in real life to just be like, hey, let's all get together on Zoom and eat dinner in our kitchen, and then take it to the next step further and be like, I'm just going to eat dinner in my kitchen with whatever. But so to me, that sounds extreme, but I'm sure.
But you know what?
People
it's not
would
extreme.
take that on, and just as that became more and more the norm, like to me, I would probably always think that's extreme, but generations down the road, that would just be the norm.
But this is like the crazy thing is this is already happening.
Yeah.
So there is in the New York Times, I saw that there was this opinion piece. It was like this kind of a mini doc, and it was so it was video of people who have fallen in love with AI chatbots, specifically from this company called Replica. And Replica has been able to make AIs that can mimic your dead relatives, and but people are like falling in love with these things. And they talk about this in the article, that essentially that people are starting to replace human interaction with chatbots because they're not messy, right?
Yes.
Like, because that you can control a chatbot and they're not going to ever like tell you anything that you don't like. They're not ever going to be like abusive to you or anything like that. It says, and this is a quote, that AI chatbots will continue, as ChatGPT does, exhibit behaviors indistinguishable from humans. And since 2016, millions of people have used AI personal chatbot app Replica to reanimate their dead relatives or fall in love with new companions. And there are testimonial articles of things like "My therapist, the robot," and "I learned to love a bot." And this kind of just reminds me of the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, how he like falls in love, and like that seems like when that movie came out, it seemed like this like total science fiction sort of nonsense. But like now it like seems totally real.
Yeah.
And like it just kind of reminds me of just the human propensity to confuse these things, to confuse what is human and even like what is divine, right? Like it reminds me of the verse in Isaiah where Isaiah is comparing how like humans are so quick to turn things that are earthly into divine and to worship them. And he uses the example of in Isaiah 44, it says this: "A carpenter stretches a line, he marks it with his pencil. He shapes it with planes and marks it with a compass. He shapes it into a figure of a man and with the beauty of a man to dwell in a house." And it kind of keeps going down, and then it says he like uses the tree to warm himself and all these things, and then it eventually becomes a god and he worships it and he falls down before it, and part of the tree he burns in a fire and eats and is satisfied, and like how, and it's an example of how, you know, as humanity we can take things, tools, our creations themselves, and then like worship them or replace them with something that is other than what it really is. And I mean, this isn't just like a biblical idea, that this has also been found in like social science, called in the 1960s they did a thought experiment where they had not a thought experiment, it was just an experiment in general, where they had called where they found that people would rate things more human than if it seemed like a human. And they call it the Eliza effect. I don't know, that is really concerning to me.
Yeah.
And especially because it's like, if people are using this for their, you know, their like therapists or their, you know, lovers, that it doesn't seem too far of a stretch that they'll start using, you know, AI chatbots as their pastor.
Yeah.
But like, I see that the danger in that is that chatbots tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
Not what is truth.
Yeah. Well, and that they mentioned a little bit about that in that article too. And I think that, yeah, it's like we're called as Christians, you know, Christ calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves, and to bear with each other's burdens. And like we hear that a lot, love your neighbor as yourself. And, you know, but the reason that we're called to do that and that it's hard to do that is because people are hard sometimes, right? And so it's like your coworkers, your family members, sometimes like there are things about people that we truly love. It's like I love my family. I love people that I work with, but sometimes they get under my skin because they do things differently than I do, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
like we can get into that mindset sometimes. It's like, oh, so and so just bugs me so much because they do this, or because they, and it's just like a minor thing, like they do it differently than you. And so, yeah, if AI is created to just make your life easier and do everything for you, like nobody else necessarily behaves that way around you, where they just live to serve you all the time and like do
Yeah.
everything that pleases you. And so, yeah, I can see getting to that point where it's like, man, my brother really annoys me. I'm just going to have AI do this for me really quick because it's not going to be late, or it's not going to, like, I'm not gonna have to listen to some weird story from my neighbor who always, like, he helps me with this, but I always have to sit through 20 minutes of random chit chat, like, where it's
Well,
like, but those little moments are like where we build relationship and where we can be with people and love people. Even though sometimes, yes, it is inconvenient.
yeah, well, I think that's the kind of the truth about this, is that Christian virtue cannot be like, it is inherently created with other people. Like
Yeah.
you like, the talks about Jesus talks about the law being like the love of God and the love of others. Like you literally can't like develop Christian virtues of humility or long suffering or love or forgiveness, or like you can't develop those through like any sort of AI chatbot. And I think we tend to confuse something that we confuse ourselves with, is that Christianity is just simply about like, and growing spiritually is just simply
Mm,
about like having a deeper understanding of the Bible, or having like more intellectual facts, or being able to like articulate well, where it's like Christian spiritual development, I think, is a lot less intellectual than that,
mm,
and a lot more inconvenient,
yeah.
and a lot more relational.
Yes,
There,
it's
there's
like
there's there's an
discipleship and community, and
yeah
not
there's a
just like
there's
go live on your own in a mountain somewhere and talk to God forever.
there's an embodiment to it, right? There's an
Yeah.
embodiment to Christian, Christian virtues, that,
Mm,
I mean, that's like modeled by the fact that God himself was incarnate, right?
yeah.
Like I think that's really profound meditation of like Jesus himself, when he came, he was embodied, right? God embodied himself to show us the way. And I think that there is always this temptation throughout Christian history to want to become disembodied,
Mm,
right? Like they're like the Gnostic heresies were heresies around disembodiment, or to discredit the body, whether it is to ignore the body and to think of it, it's totally sinful, or the flip side of it, of being like the body's totally irrelevant, so I can do whatever I want with my body,
mm,
right? Like it's all about what I know, so it's like it doesn't matter if I like go and be a glutton or sleep around with whoever, or um like live in luxury, because that doesn't matter. What really matters if I have like a one-on-one relationship with God, like
right.
through my intellect, through
Yeah.
knowledge. And that's just like not the way Christianity has ever worked. And so
Right.
it's just like, and I do think that there's I think a real threat that people will start getting like, spiritual direction, or feel like they're having spiritual edification through AI, that cannot be replaced, except like the only way you can experience it is in Christian community.
Yeah.
um and having that immediacy. And I think even as like for friends, I think that since we do put like so much stock on like having like the immediacy of Christ, like this is like this technology is a mediator of sorts.
Mm.
Like
Well, even like with the friends, they I don't know what, I'm lacking the word to say it, but the idea that we're all ministers, and so, most friends churches have this time of open worship where anyone can get up and share. That is like inviting multiple voices, multiple viewpoints, multiple walks of life to come and speak and share into the collective body. if you're only getting your input from ChatGPT, like, you're only hearing from one voice all the
And
time.
And if you've ever experienced open worship for any length of time, there's always that one person who is like, and this is something that I appreciate. And at first it really irritated me. It is just like, you're going to get perspectives that really clash with yours. Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you're like, wow, that is like totally way out of left field. And
you would think that they were having their response written by ChatGPT when they got up.
Well, no, it's like, wait, like, no, like you couldn't expect it. Like, I think that's the thing, is like that you couldn't make it up.
Yeah.
In the sense of like, it's so unpredictable that this is what would be said. And I think that is part of like the mystery of God, is that we can't control him and we can't predict what he's going to say.
Yeah. Well, and also just with bearing with people, it's like you got these people sometimes where you're like, okay, I don't know, but I love that person and I'm just gonna keep going with this. But speaking with, you mentioned earlier about like the fear of people getting their spiritual direction from AI. I think you said you had AI write a devotional for you.
I did.
I wanted to know if we could look at that really quickly and see what spiritual direction you got from ChatGPT.
So the prompt was, give me a devotional about AI. That was my prompt. And it's called God's Design in Artificial Intelligence. The scripture is Psalm 139 verses 13 and 14. For you created me in my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made, and your works are wonderful. I know that full well. And according to this, that was a quote from the NIV. I did not check it.
Okay.
It quotes the NIV. I just don't know if it's actually accurate.
Yeah.
And here's the devotional. In today's world, the rapid development of technology, especially in the realm of artificial intelligence, can leave us awestruck at the incredible capabilities that humans have achieved, from self-driving cars to voice-activated personal assistants. AI has become an integral part of our lives. But as we marvel at the wonders of AI, it is essential to remember the one who created both the human mind and the tools we've built to mimic it. Psalm 139 verses 13 and 14 remind us that God is the ultimate creator. He has meticulously formed each of us in our mother's womb, fearfully and wonderfully made. The complexity of the human brain, with its ability to think and reason and create, is a testament to his divine craftsmanship. It's no coincidence that the pursuit of AI often mirrors the remarkable intricacies of the human mind. And as we delve deeper into the world of AI, we are merely discovering more infinite wisdom of our creator. While AI can accomplish impressive feats, it's essential to recognize its limitations. AI lacks consciousness, emotions, and the divine spark that makes us uniquely human, our soul. Unlike AI, we are created in God's image, capable of love, compassion, and deep relationship with our Heavenly Father. As Christians, we must use AI responsibly and ethically, ensuring that it aligns with God's values. We should also remember that while AI can enhance our lives, it can never replace the depth of our spiritual journey and our relationship with God. So let us approach the development and the use of AI with humility, recognizing that even our most significant technological achievements are a mere reflection of God's creative genius. As we navigate this brave new world of AI, let us continually seek God's guidance and wisdom, acknowledging that He alone is the true source of knowledge and understanding.
Okay, I want to say maybe two things on that. One, that's impressive. Like
it is
that's where I think is potentially, like, once again, it's the double-edged sword. It's like I think that was good without us fact checking if that was NIV or not. Like, there's that in there. But like, if you had to lead a devotional in 5 minutes and you just forgot, oh no, I'm on to lead the devotional at the potluck or at the Bible study and I don't have time to do it, like, I think that could get you by in a pinch. I'll just say that without like leading too much into it. And you could never even say that that was created by AI, and I don't think anybody would question. Like, that sounded
No,
that
sounds very
sounded real.
human.
Yeah, and
Sounds very
so
human.
there, once again, there's like, okay, it could potentially save you some time there. I don't know, maybe we throw out 10 other prompts and 7 of them come back as horrible, and so then it doesn't have a good track record. But one for one right there, that was pretty good.
Yeah, but I thought it was so
But
interesting.
it's also kind of fluffy. Like, I think it's good, and like it would get you by, and it would get people some talking, but it also just seemed very surface levelly, at least to me.
Yeah, so like when I was like critiquing this, I was like, well, like it doesn't really actually like analyze the psalm,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It just kind of uses it as a like platform
Yeah.
to like talk about creation, right? And what I thought was so interesting about it too is just how it like brings up certain questions. Like it brings up like, oh, I thought my favorite, where was it? It had to do with human value.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking. It mentions one point as like, AI can be a useful tool, but we need to remember to use it ethically and morally. But then it just keeps going on, and it's like, okay, but what does it mean to use it ethically and morally? And so that's where part of me is, I'm like, that could be a good springboard if you were having to use that as a small group. Like, if you have the forethought to then ask that question to your group, like, okay, guys, what does it mean to use a tool like this ethically and morally and from a Christian perspective? That can start to have a good discussion there. But just reading it as is and moving on, there's not much there with it. But I could see how you could use that then, and then like pull some things out of it and whatever. That's where I'm like, people who say they would use it to write a sermon, I'm like, I'm not sure what it would get you. I mean, like, it would probably get you something like that you could read, but there's not much like into it. You'd have to go in then and tweak it and like really be like, okay, this is a point I want to highlight. What are some questions we can pull out of this? Where it's like, you still have to do some work on it.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's trying to like eliminate all work, right?
No, yeah, hopefully.
I have this is a real life example of somebody who shall not be named. They like, I don't think anybody here who's listening knows this person. So it's not, I'm not trying to like cast anybody under the bus, but I had someone tell me that like I should write my sermons like a rough draft and then have ChatGPT edit it as a way to like make it sound better.
Yeah.
And a part of me was just like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I do it all the time. It's great. And I was like, I like, because a part of me feels like part of this like the struggle of writing and doing these things, it forces me to like analyze what I'm saying.
Yes.
And it like, I'm growing as a person. And so like shortcutting that like ends up not making me a better writer or makes me a better pastor. It just like short circuits that whole process.
Right. And that's where I think those good discussions are. And that's why I think ultimately this episode and whatever is kind of hopefully opening the door is like, it's such a new thing. There really is no playbook on what you should and shouldn't do with it and that kind of stuff. And so I think it's good for us to have those conversations, because if you're more correct than my inkling, where it is going to be more of a smartphone type thing and it's going to be involved in everyone's life, then we need to know how to use it responsibly and ethically. And so I think we need to decide like what you would and wouldn't use it for, where it's like, I think I personally would be okay having it write an update email about some random stuff just to send out to people to update them on things, as opposed, I wouldn't be okay with being like, now write my sermon, because I kind of agree with you there, where it's like, you need to be personally digging into that and looking at it. And like we talk about as Christians, scripture being alive and God breathed, and always, like always changing is maybe not the right word, but you know what I mean, where it's like you can read a passage year after year and it's something new is going to come alive to you.
Yeah.
And it could be even Like there could be something going on culturally that you're going to use scripture to speak into. There could be something going along in the lives of people in your congregation that you're going to use scripture to speak into, which ChatGPT won't be able to know that. And so it can just spit out a base, like, here is a sermon on John chapter 4, but it's not going to know the intricacies of like what's going on in the world and people's lives that you might want to use that scripture, and that God would use that scripture to come alive in their lives. But I would be okay with sending an update about the potluck and the missions banquet, if it's
Yeah.
really that time consuming for you to write a 1-page email.
Well, and one of the things that I read an article about, like Christians using kind of delving into the ethics of AI is the sense of like, well, like this would free up pastors to spend more time with people so that they would spend less time on their sermon prep, so that they can then they can spend more time with the sick person and doing the more human things. And I was like, I don't like, while that sounds good, like convenience always and efficiencies always sound like the best thing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't necessarily think that it's the good thing. And I think that that's like the difference here. And like one of the things is as Christians, we must use AI responsibly and ethically, ensuring that it aligns with God's values. But in that, it just already assumes that we have to, that you also have to use it.
Yes.
Like I think that there
and
there
that just what those ethical and boundaries are.
Yeah.
But you have to use ethical and moral boundaries and God boundaries, and it's like, okay, what is it? What
Like,
does that mean?
And what does that mean?
Know who's reading this?
And even if it aligns with, and like, what is God's values?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And then it's just like, I think one of God's values is that you treat people as the image of God. And I think that one of the benefits in this moment, this cultural moment, is that we are having this discussion. I think that the issue of theological anthropology is coming to the fore of like, what does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to be made in the image of God or the image of God? Because one of the things that's crazy is that there are people now who like, there was like, I mean, this was in the news a while back about a guy who claims that Google's chatbot has a soul.
Yeah.
And there's people like the Turing test that says what means to be conscious is that it just appears to be conscious, that you can't distinguish between the consciousness of a human and consciousness of an AI, and like then therefore it has consciousness. And so then, but like I think that ends up causing problems because that like you don't want to, like, these things aren't actually human,
right?
And I think that there is a temptation for us to overvalue things for people. Like we value things more than people, and then we treat people less than people and as things, right? Like I think there's this twin temptation that like technology has a way of making us value technology more than other humans. Like, and I see this with like the Luddite revolution. So if you like don't know anything about the Luddites, like usually it's used as a derisive term of people who are technophobes. But the Luddites originally were textile workers who saw the rise of industrial, like weaving machines and spinning machines as a threat to English society and English culture, and specifically the wool workers themselves and the textile workers themselves, and that they were going to be replaced, and it was going to like upend the fabric of English society, and it did. And so what they would do is that they would go and basically create militant raids on factories and destroy these like looms, these electric looms. And what was so crazy, if you look into the history, there's a book coming out that I'm really excited to read called The Blood in the Machine, where it became actually it could be a law punishable by death to destroy or vandalize one of these machines. And I thought that was really profound, that like we would value a machine to the point that we would be willing to murder another human being over it in a legal sense. And that was like, that's bonkers. But I do think that at least that's bonkers to me. as a person who also opposes capital punishment. But like, I think it shows how it's easy for us to start valuing property or things more than people. But on the flip side, right, like there's like all these like AI, like, you know, like Alexa or Siri,
Yeah.
like where people like constantly just will be like, oh yeah, you know, like Siri do this, Alexa do this, and it can affect when we engage in the world through machines. We can end up dehumanizing other people as a result. So like, say like the store greeters at, you know, Walmart, for example, or we tend to view people who can be automated away as being less significant. And I think that like, if Christians have a sort of like, you know, a biblical anthropology here, like we should be very strongly like against those things. And I think that that's something that the Friends, like, it's not an explicit like testimony historically with the Friends of like, historically Friends have their testimonies of like the peace, simplicity, truth, community, those sorts of things, spices. But like valuing humans as the image of God, I think is a testimony. And I think in this like new age, I think that there is potential for like a new testimony of like Quakers pursuing to staying human, knowing our place and treating people in their humanity with all of that theological significance behind it.
Yeah.
But I do worry that AI will confuse that and make it easier to, you know, to devalue humans and overvalue machines. Because, you know, if an AI can pass the bar exam and write devotionals, like why would you need to have people write devotionals for like Fruit of the Vine or, you know, Daily Bread, if you can just like have, you know, somebody just generate them and then kind of like edit it to make sure that it's not like spin out heresies.
Yeah. Well, to go back to the beginning, that's the whole thing, that this writer's strike is happening right now. It's like they're asking for more money and a few other things, and like some of the higher ups are like, we don't need to do that, right? We could just have AI write the next episode of Star Wars. And so like that's that tension there of devaluing the human aspect. And even probably for time's sake, it's like AI could do it a lot quicker than a human could do. But we're just having to live in that tension and being like, yes, it could be more convenient, but is it the best thing for us?
Being human is terribly inconvenient.
Yeah.
Right. Like human communities are terribly inefficient, terribly redundant, terribly, you know, like messy. And like, you know, that's something that we have to, I mean, that's just what it means to be human. Right.
And I will say, this is not so much an AI thing, but it's like maybe a precursor. Like my father-in-law is very much, and I know other people like this, but I notice it a lot with him. Like he's very anti like self-checkout at stores, and like, you know, now fast food places have it a lot more where you can just do the self-serve kiosk and take your own number.
Yeah.
He is like staunchly against that, to a point where I'm like, dude, like calm down. But like he'll cause a scene. It's too much for me sometimes. But and I will say, when I was younger, I still wrestle with this sometimes, but I can let convenience take over and be like,
totally.
Yes, I get it. People are losing jobs potentially, but it's a lot quicker for me to go through the self-checkout and get out of here in 5 minutes than I will gonna wait in the 2 lines at Target that are open right now, and it's gonna take me forever to get through. So convenience is a real thing. Like
it is a real thing.
It wins out in a lot of times, but yeah, at what cost? I guess that's the bigger question that this episode brings upon. I guess AI, self-checkouts, all this kind of stuff. Like convenience is a factor, but we also have to factor in the human piece of all this kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, and I think, I mean, I thought about this the other day. So it's like, as much as I'm like, you know, kind of, I want to rail against the machine, and the AI chatbots, generally against human automation, I do find myself at times just like maybe not hypocritically, but or like maybe just I'm like, maybe it is hypocritical, or just being just because being human means that you're also contradictory a lot of the times. of I went to Safeway and I was getting myself some coffee, like for my office. I had one item, and it was just like I could stand in the line where there was a person who had like 40 items.
Yeah.
Or I could just go to the self-checkout and check out my one item.
Yep.
And
You'd
I
be
was
on your
like,
way.
and I did it. Instead of waiting in that line, I was like, I'm gonna do the self-checkout. And there was like I literally thought about it. I thought about it and be like, I should stand in this line because you know that's a job. But then it's like, but I was like, but
You're
I
like,
need to.
I got a job to do too, and I got to get to it.
I'm like, I'm on my lunch break, and I don't want to just like sit here for forever. And it's just like, like I think that shows how powerful these things are. That
Sure.
like that it's not just like, oh hey, like I can just have like just a personal problem. Because I think that it ends up causing us to make choices. Like the availability of it creates choices.
Yeah. It's
that,
like on paper we think, oh, I would never do that, and then you get presented with the situation where it's like, I can save 5 minutes by just going over there. I'm just gonna do it.
Well, we've been here for a while now, and I
Yes.
think that we need to wrap up.
Surprise. This whole episode, we've been reading from a script generated by AI.
Not quite. We did, full disclosure, we did tell you the parts.
Yeah.
That we had legitimately, we did talk about maybe we should interview a chatbot for our episode.
Yeah. That'd be interesting.
But I think that this is just, I don't know, this has been something that I've been thinking about, and maybe going forward with the podcast, our loyal listeners, you can
they're not our loyal listeners, they're our
cherished
dear listeners and our cherished listeners.
Well, I'm gonna say loyal listeners, because I know that there's people who listen regularly, to have more sorts of these sorts of conversations in the future. And I would love to continue to think about this topic at large, because I think about it all the time. I'm not necessarily a doomer about it. I'm not panicked about it, because ultimately God's in control.
Sure.
Right. That with that in mind, even though he's sovereign, I do see that there are I don't think technologies are morally neutral, and we need to just acquiesce to the sense that just because it can be created, then therefore God approves of it.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So it's I think about these things, and I think about just how quick we are to just remove the human, just to jump on board to progress and eliminate humans, or eliminate human interaction as a way to solve problems. And I see this all over the place, whether it is people trying to get therapy, or I know I read this story about Japanese elders, they didn't have enough workers for the aging Japanese population, so they try to make robots to care for them. And I was that's horrifying.
Yeah, I've seen
but
that.
This is real, this is happening. And I'm not I'm not a crazy person.
I don't think you are.
No, I know, but sometimes I feel I'm I talk about it, and I'm it really riles me up on your day to day. It's Alexa doesn't seem all that threatening, but then it's just but it's it doesn't seem to me very, very far-fetched to think that we could live in a very different future.
Yeah.
And
and
especially in the church. And and we should be intentional about these things before we just accept them. Because I see so many times churches just adopting technologies because of convenience or pragmatism.
Yeah.
And maybe having some theological reflection on these things on a deeper level might be helpful. So we just started a conversation.
There you go.
So I want to encourage our listeners, if you're in a friend's church, to start thinking about this, start having conversations,
and let us know what you think. Review this episode, write
a reply,
write a review. You could have ChatGPT write your review of this podcast. And if they give us 1 star, I guess they give us 1 star, but I think they'll give us 5. They seem to be generally positive in my interactions. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. And we will be back with you in November. Once again, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to share it with others. Please rate and review the podcast so others can find it. Contact the Office of Northwest Yearly Meeting if you would like to be